a drop in the ocean, crying out to be heard. I screaming my lungs out. You don't hear a word. One love, one love, one love, one love, yeah. One love, one love, one love, one love. Go, sister,
We are Africa, Jamaica, United States. Providing the music for the children, you see. Not forward, not back, but united we come.
Yeah.
One love for everyone, each and every one. One love. Sing it! One love. One love.
yeah.
One love.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, we are here because each person present believes in individual liberty. My name is Mark Mercedes. I've got a PhD in analytical chemistry and tertiary qualifications in OHS. Now I'm going to speak to you about two subjects today. Firstly, the actual numbers surrounding COVID-19, and secondly, about risk management. Now the first point to be made is you can be misled with factual information. I'll give an example. Many years ago there was a marketing war between people that put milk in plastic glass and people that put milk in paper cartons. The people that put the milk in paper cartons said, the problem with milk in glass is that the sunlight destroys all the vitamin C, 80% of it. Therefore you should buy the milk in the paper cartons. Now that was factually correct. It is correct there is 5 times more vitamin C in paper milk than in glass milk. What they didn't tell you was there's hardly any vitamin C in milk anyway. So all you're doing is comparing two tiny insignificant numbers. Now that's what's been happening with the statistics we're getting from the government on a daily basis. We are told how many people are being infected and how many people are dying. We aren't being told how many people die of other things and about the effect of this virus on the age at which people are dying. So I had a look at the numbers myself. Now these numbers I'm about to quote are readily available on the government website. They aren't secret in any way at all. Life expectancy for men, so the average life expectancy for men is 80.7. The average age at which people that die with COVID-19 die at for men is 82.0. Now, for women, life expectancy, normal life expectancy is 84.9. The average age at which women die with COVID-19 is 86.0. So in each case, the average age in which people die with the virus is higher than the life expectancy. So what that means is if I was to make the statement that whether you have COVID-19 or not has no measurable effect on your life expectancy or your mortality, I'm not giving an opinion, I'm simply making an observation. Right? I'm not giving an opinion, I'm just describing how things are. I'm not giving an opinion, I'm merely stating a fact. And I'm astonished that the government officials don't know this. You know, this took me 10 minutes to work this out. It's a simple calculation. Now let's talk about risk management. Now, most people don't understand how risk management works, so let me explain it to you. If you go into a mine site and look at the risk management plan on the mine site, you find the author of that plan wasn't a miner. That is, someone with no qualifications in mining at all. It's a professional risk manager. Now what the risk manager does is he speaks to the mine managers, to the plant operators, to the excavator operators, and gets an overall understanding of the risks on that site. Then he manages those risks according to an established hierarchy of controls. I won't go into all the details about that, but it's called a systems approach. Now, a systems approach is where you look at the entire system, you consider the risk of this risk on the whole system, and then when you design your risk management protocols, you consider the effect of those protocols on the whole system. Because if the procedures you put in place to manage one risk, introduce more risk elsewhere, it's been counterproductive. Now, one of those risk management protocols is called isolation. Now, you use isolation when one of two things is true. Either you can isolate the source of the risk, or you can isolate those at risk. And the government doesn't understand this, and a couple of weeks ago, I heard Scott Morrison say the dumbest thing I've ever heard a Prime Minister say. Now, let me make this point. I'm a Conservative, so in general terms, he's on my side of politics. And this movement is bringing together people from right across the political spectrum, from the right to the left, because we all agree on this. So, before we made this statement, I kind of liked Scott Morrison. When we made this statement, he lost me. When talking about why old people weren't isolated, he said, when it rains, everyone gets wet. No, Mr. Morrison, people that are isolated from the rain inside don't get wet. That's the whole point. You can protect yourself from the rain by isolating yourself from it. Now, a professional risk manager would have looked at this so-called pandemic, and yes, talk to the doctors by all means, and the epidemiologists. Then you might speak to the economists, get an understanding of the effect of any lockdowns or restrictions upon people's employment or businesses. Then you might talk to financial managers, get an understanding of how that might affect the stock market and people's self-funded retiree incomes. Then you might talk to health professionals, to mental health professionals, get an understanding of the effect of lockdowns and restrictions upon mental health, self-harm, suicides. And then you might talk to oncologists to get an understanding of the extent to which you might get increased cancer diagnoses late because people couldn't go to a clinic, and therefore more early deaths from cancer. And that's just 4 or 5 off the top of my head. There's probably a dozen more people you can speak to. Get a global understanding of the culture of the society, and then you put in place a nuanced approach to it, which in this case would have been protecting old people. Go to old people's homes and protect them. Do whatever you have to protect them from being exposed to this virus. This sledgehammer approach that the government has done is using a sledgehammer propaganda. And the effects of this are going to be felt for generations to come. And understand this. In 50 or 60 years' time, people that are now children are going to look back on this point in time as a time when their idyllic life was destroyed. They're going to tell stories of how their father or mother or brother or sister took their own life. Or they might tell a story of how their parents' business was destroyed and they became homeless and had to live on the streets out of the boot of a car, and their marriage broke down as a result. Or they may tell stories of how their mother died in their 30s from a misdiagnosis of breast cancer because the clinics were closed. They'll tell these stories and they'll remember that in 50 or 60 years' time. And so, if it is the case that COVID-19 isn't killing people from the numbers that I quoted before, it is also the case that restrictions to stop people getting it aren't saving lives. So that's just follows a logical consequence of that statement. And my statement to the Premiers and Prime Ministers is this. We look back on previous leaders of the country or the state, and about the worst thing you could say about someone at the moment is, well, he was pretty bloody useless. That's about the worst thing that you would say. I can't think of a single political figure, former Premier or Prime Minister, who is hated and despised at the moment. But in years to come, when Scott Morrison and Daniel Andrews and Mark McGowan and Anastasia Palaszczuk are old people, they will be hated by the people whose lives they destroyed. So my message to Scott Morrison, Anastasia Palaszczuk, Daniel Andrews and Mark McGowan is this. Well, it's really a question. Based on the facts that I've just quoted, based on the actual verifiable facts, you aren't saving lives, you are destroying lives. You won't be remembered as someone who saved lives, but as someone who destroyed lives. And quite simply, is that how you want to be remembered?
Hooray!
How they go? Come on, here they go. Well done. Nothing better than the truth. I'm delighted to introduce a great contributor to Western Australia, to the health of Western Australians, Dr. Judy Wilyman. Give her a big round of applause.
Well, how fantastic is this to see so many awake people in Australia. Fighting for their freedom and humanity. Only last week I was told not to comment in this debate because nobody agreed with me. And this is because we have not had democracy in this country for 10 years. The public's voice has been removed not just from our politicians, but by the media that does not represent the public's voice on these health issues.
Exactly! Fake news everywhere!
It is time for all Australians to stand up and say what type of Australia do you want to live in? And this goes for our doctors, our nurses, our police, and our politicians. We all have families, and we are today, let me tell you, fighting for our children's future. This is an attack on humanity. And it is an attack on humanity using pseudoscience. You will notice that every health directive that was brought in reversed the health protocols for promoting health in the community. I challenge any one of you to list a health directive that will improve someone's health that was brought in when they closed the borders and decided that putting the military on the borders would keep out a virus. Let there be no mistake, this is a plandemic. And there has been no global pandemic. Let me explain that. We can say there's been an outbreak of serious disease in some countries. But that virus was not in many of the countries when they declared this a global pandemic. And that is the case for Australia. And you cannot determine a global pandemic until you have observed the virus and how it behaves in every different environmental condition in every country with different populations and host characteristics and different quality of healthcare system. That is the fraud that we are dealing with. And I speak to Scott Morrison today. Scott Morrison has met with Bill Gates. We know that he meets with Murdoch. We know that the deals are done. And let me say, for those of you that are not aware of the Gavi Alliance, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, they are the corporate public partnerships that design immunisation policies, and they promote those policies through the World Health Organization. So not only does the Gavi Alliance design immunisation policy and recommend 16 vaccines to your children, which Mr Morrison has mandated for education, but these corporate private partners were busy in October 2019 at Event 201 describing to all world leaders how they should handle a pandemic when it occurs. And lo and behold, by January 21st, Mr Morrison was pulling the trigger for his emergency powers. By adopting the emergency powers under the international health regulations that we signed up to, we gave away our sovereignty to those corporate partnerships that promote immunisation, vaccination policies through the World Health Organization. Now, that is very deceptive because the World Health Organization has a charter to present independent, objective science in its health policies. But behind this organisation, they are being directed to design the international health regulations by the Gavi Alliance. And I can assure you that locking down the population, social distancing, medically testing healthy people, mask wearing, they are all the opposite directives to how you would control an infectious disease in a country like Australia. They have reversed the directives. And these fraudulent statistics that they are providing to you, they are stopping healthy people and collecting their swabs, nose and throat swabs, PCR tests from healthy people, a test which is not a diagnostic tool for the virus that they are looking for, and a positive test does not indicate that they've even had the virus or that they are an active case with the virus. So the publicity that the media is giving cases of diseases is fraudulent.
The fraud on the people!
And that is how you manipulate a pandemic, by manipulating the statistics to increase the incidence of one disease and appearance and to decrease the incidence of another disease. So we've noticed that this year, whilst COVID cases were rising, influenza cases and deaths were dropping. And the overall assessment from scientists all around the world is that this year's flu season has not been any stronger in most countries than in other years. Some countries have had a stronger flu season than others, but the overall mortality statistics are much the same. And we have no concerns about being threatened by a virus that is transmitting any more quickly in the community than other viruses. This virus was downgraded in March, on the 19th of March. So you do not have to be fearful to reject these directives that the government has brought in. We need to have a voice with the government to make them accountable for the directives they are saying will be the new norms. I will point out to you that one thing that happened globally this year was that many countries mandated the flu vaccine for the first time this year in many countries. and the incidences of death occurred in the aged care facilities 2 or 3 weeks after the flu campaigns. Now, we know that vaccines cause neurological damage in many people. That is a fact that the media has censored, and so have the politicians in Australia. You are not hearing that all vaccines come with side effects, and they are worse in some people than others. Due to your genetics. So if they want to claim that they are using evidence-based science, they need to investigate the correlation between the use of the flu vaccine in the aged care facilities and the population, which they mandated this year, with the increased deaths that occurred 2 or 3 weeks after. That is evidence-based medicine. And if you want to control an infectious disease in a country like Australia, then you isolate the sick people, not the healthy people. There is no one in this country who should be accepting a medical test if you are healthy and have no symptoms. No testing of no We will not social distance.
No!
That is antisocial. We are a community. We are human beings. We need each other. Social capital.
Yes!
We have our elderly imprisoned in aged care facilities where many of us cannot visit them because we refuse to inject ourselves with chemicals. We want these directives immediately removed. They are harming human health, seriously.
End the lockdown!
And I will also say to Mr McGowan that we want our borders open. For all of you here, you will notice that the West Australian, the West Australian, has informed you that 91% of West Australians want that border closed. Well, I dispute that. We need to demand independent media. We have not had a media for 5 years at least. Parents have been locked out of these health debates. The politicians would not see us last year as the No Jab, No Play, a crime against humanity, was passed through this West Australian Parliament in just 6 days. Not a single politician in West Australia stood up for fully informed consent to all medications. The Nuremberg Code. Medical ethics. The doctors are breaching their medical ethics in Australia because their regulatory board has gagged them. This needs to stop. And thankfully, and finally, we have one lawyer, 2 lawyers actually, that have stood up for the public health and public interest in government policies which will destroy human health. So stay strong with your convictions and try to direct your closed-mind friends who are reading the West Australians and who are watching the TV. Turn it off, enjoy life, nothing has changed. And just one last thing before we go and chant our message through King's Park. Let me be quite clear. The human rights that we have been forced to give up by crimes committed by the Australian government is the fundamental human right of bodily autonomy.
Report the truth.
Important human rights, the that of bodily autonomy. If you lose that, you lose your quality of life. The government now has the right to inject whatever they want into our children because they passed coercive vaccination. This is a crime. You need to reframe this debate for all your closed-minded friends and be sympathetic with them because the indoctrination has occurred over 3 decades.
True.
Through the education system, through the universities, sidelining academics that produce the academic literature that is against vested interest in policy. The donations and lobbying system in Australia is conducive to corporations controlling our politicians and the agendas in our health policies. We need to stop this political process. We need to take back control of our government. No quarantine for any healthy person coming into our lovely country. And remember, we are the many, they are the few. And I'm aware that many professionals, and that includes any police that are here today, lawyers, doctors, nurses, we know that you've been gagged by your regulations, but you need to think of what we want in Australia. Do you want this bullying that the West Australian has been addressing to all the people, parents questioning vaccines for the last decade? The West Australian has bullied and abused by labelling us simply as anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. This is not good enough. Is that what you want, a divided Australia?
Free the truth!
The no jab, no pay, no play policies have divided parents. They are in the courts. Families are suffering from anxiety and depression. It is no longer a joyous affair to have a baby in this country.
Disgusting. And
I say that directly to Mark McGowan, as we are here in Western Australia, and specifically to Mr Scott Morrison, who as Minister for Social Services approved the no jab, no pay in Parliament in 2015. That is a crime against humanity. It is a breach of every international human rights covenant that Australia has ratified, not just signed up to. Yet, when the Human Rights Commission decided to have a conversation on human rights in Australia last year, there was one freedom we were not allowed to discuss, and it was not on their agenda. Medical freedom. Informed consent to all medication, that's what we stand for, and that gives us freedom. Okay, thank you everyone, and please pass those messages on to your friends with conviction and with sympathy for the fact that people have been indoctrinated. This is a very sad situation. It's been going on for 2.5 decades at a minimum. Chronic illness in our children has skyrocketed, and that's the other problem. The government has not used evidence-based science, and investigated the direct correlation between the decline in children's health and the increased use of vaccines in the population. This is not a health policy. A health policy would be promoted on improvements in children's health that we would have observed over the decades as they increased it. Ask your politician to provide evidence that children's health has improved. It has not, and it is not a health policy. Okay, thank you everyone for being here today and showing my friends that people do agree with me. I can promise you that our underground army is huge when those doctors, lawyers, police and other social workers realise that their own children's future is at risk if they enforce the government's directives. Thank you.
That I have ever heard. We need to fight. We need to stand up. We need to let our voices be heard. There are so many people in the travel industry, travel agents, aircraft workers, pilots, people who work at Perth Airport, Uber drivers, hoteliers, people who work in the cleaning industry. Everyone, there's a chain reaction that affects so many West Australians. Okay? It's not good enough. And this house is our house. There are so many West Australians right now who are stranded overseas because they cannot get home to their country. The borders are shut. There is a restriction on flights coming to this country. People of West Australians have been turned back, not once, not twice, but 3 times. They cannot get on a flight because there are a limited amount of seats on an aircraft coming to this country because premiers like Mark McGowan only care about their election. We need to work with members of parliament. Go to their door. Don't just hashtag, don't just post anything on Facebook. Don't just like anything. Get on the phone. Take action. Stand up for our families. Stand up for our future. Our children deserve better. Our children deserve better than what we are being dished out from this house. And the media are complicit. The West Australians should be ashamed of themselves for what they put out in the paper every day. We have thousands of West Australians that have a right to come back into this country from other states. But Kerry Stokes can fly back and forward. They get a $450 million windfall from an executive order that Premier McGowan signed, whilst West Australians suffer. Businesses suffer. He's now turned businesses against us, one another, to divide us. Businesses who stand in fear because they don't want to become like Victoria. But it's all fake. There is no need for lockdowns. There is no need for lockdowns.
Come on, feel y'all. Everybody get up. Get up in the house. Get up. Time to feel. Yeah. I see nothing. I see no one. I'm in my shell, so I don't get burned. I'm a drop in the ocean, crying out to be heard. I scream in my lungs out. You don't hear a word. One love, one love, one love, one love, yeah. One love, one love, one love, one love. Tell sister,
We are Africa, Jamaica, united, providing the music for the children, you see. Not forward, not back, but united we come.
Yeah.
One love for everyone, each and every one. One love, sing it! One love, one love,
yeah.
one love,
One love, yeah.
one love,
One love,
one love.
one love, yeah. I
Got to give me one love.
I challenge myself. One love. I challenge myself. One love. Challenge yourself with one love.
One love.
See, I challenge myself to take a step toward
One
perfection.
love.
I tortured my desire by denying its infection.
One
I laughed at the devil as he squirmed within me till I cut through the darkness from oblivion to infinity.
One
For meditation, I sacrifice the things that pollute me.
One
For love, I have great qualities and great beauty.
One
For sanity, I travel great distances of extremes.
One
For happiness, I grant you 3 wishes and 1 dream.
One love.
dream to manifest
Sing it
everything you realize.
One love.
One God, one world for honor.
One love.
time, this time, right here, right now.
One
If you don't know how to
love.
fly, jump and you will learn how.
One love is all you
Stop at the end,
need.
there's nothing to risk, there's nothing to defend.
Heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all that you can show. Half the story has never been told. So now you see the light. Stand up for your rights. Yeah. Get up, stand up.